Hello and welcome to Affinity Talks Gospel Podcast. You are most welcome. My name is Graham Nicholls, the Director of Affinity, and I'm joined by Lizzie, who can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I am Executive Officer at the Association of Christian Teachers, but I'm here to help host this podcast, and we're here as well with Ian Henderson from the Naked Truth Project. Have I got the name right there?
You have, yeah. Naked Truth Project is exactly right. Yeah,
I didn't know whether it had the definite article there, as the.
Well, do you know? I'm sure the branding people in our team would be very concerned about whether it's there or not. I tend to be a little bit more flexible about whether I include it or not. But yeah,
we'll get an angry email at some point.
That's right.
Tell us a bit about yourself, Ian, sort of before we're talking about the actual organisation. Tell us anything that would be useful to know about you.
Yeah, okay. So I live in Manchester with my wife, and we have two daughters. So one is 21. She actually lives in Rio at the moment. So that's where she is. And then our other one is nearly 18, and she's still with us in Manchester at the moment. I'm not, as you can tell by my accent, a Mancunian by birth. So we moved up about 20 years ago, a little bit longer than that, to do some work here, and have stayed. So it's our adopted city, but yeah, and that's where we are. And what else do you want to know? We've got a smelly dog.
Where did you grow up?
Well, a little bit all over the place. I did my kind of teenage years in Norfolk, actually, on the Norfolk coast, a place called Hunstanton. Sunny Honey was where I went to school. I was actually born in Oxford, and so kind of spent some time in Oxfordshire as well before that. So yeah, I've kind of moved around about, and so I have a few little Norfolk kind of accent things. So I say January instead of January, but I do say human, not human. So I've sort of somehow kept some things and not other things from being from Norfolk.
Would you call yourself a nowhere person? That's a kind of sociological definition, isn't it? People who...
Oh, that's not one I've heard of. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And my girls are born and bred Mancunians, and there's definitely identity in that, isn't it, for people who have kind of been in one place all their life, certainly throughout their childhood. But yeah, I've not heard that one before. A nowhere person.
Yeah, I think there's somewhere people are nowhere person is a person who's sort of moved around a lot.
Okay.
You can Google it. It's probably a better definition than I've just given you, but it's a kind of phenomenon. It's changing a bit because of economics. Lots of people are going back to their hometowns to have to live after university now, so they become a bit more rooted in their area. But what would you call yourself, Lizzie?
I mean, I'm a northerner. I was born in the Northwest, actually. I spent my first 18 years there, but I've moved around. I've also lived in Oxfordshire, Ian, and Wales, and now I'm in Yorkshire. Okay. So I'll definitely say I'm a northerner.
Yeah. Ian, you started this organisation, which we correctly named Ish, Naked Truth Project. What is it? And then you can tell us why. And then maybe some follow-ups to that. But what is this project, and then why did you do it?
Yeah, so Naked Truth has a mission to open eyes and free lives from the damaging impact of pornography. That's our kind of what. And I in many ways that's really, I guess, two key areas of work. So we talk about having work that's both upstream and downstream. So downstream would be where we know in society, in local church as well, people are drowning because of their porn use. Because there's addiction, there's struggle, there's dismay, there's discouragement, and so part of our work is recovery work. That free lives bit is about actually providing practical support and help, trying to pull people out of the water, trying to give people hope and help that they need. But also, you maybe heard the kind of famous Desmond Tutu quote that of or story. It's almost like a parable, really, of a man who was rescuing people that he saw were drowning in a river, and then he would rescue one, and then another, and then another, and Desmond Tutu says at some point someone has to go upstream and find out why all these people are falling in the river in the first place. And I guess that's the other part of our work, really. So as well as that kind of restorative recovery work, we are also involved in awareness and education. So we work in schools with high school aged pupils. We work with parents. We work with Parliament. We are just trying to address that question as well of how do we get people to a place where they can understand and see the harms of pornography, and hopefully have less people falling in the river and drowning. So yeah, Open Eyes is awareness and education. Free Lives is kind of recovery and support. And we've been doing that for over 10 years now. So I started the project around 2012. We established the charity in 2014. So yeah, this last year we were celebrating our kind of 10 years of being an established charity. And I'll be honest, I didn't sit down with my careers advisor when I was in my school in sunny Honey and say, yeah, when I'm 40, I might start a porn project. That feels like a good idea. That feels like a career move I'll make. But it is something certainly I felt over 12 years ago that God was kind of asking me to step into. And I think now more than ever, I think both within the church and within society, people can sort of see the need for that and the importance of that. But I'll be honest, when I started, it felt like a very taboo thing to talk about. It was taboo, I think, to kind of even mention porn in kind of church settings, and it was taboo within kind of culture to suggest there might be something harmful about it. You know, people would talk about it, but there wasn't an acknowledgement that it might be addictive or it might be, you know, dangerous or harmful to people. And so I think over the years we've seen a shift. We've seen people begin to understand some of the harms, but I think we've still got a little way to go as well.
So Ian, you on the website, I did a little research before we met online, and just reading a little bit of your story illuminate for me why you feel so passionate about this. I wonder, do you feel comfortable in sharing any of that, or is that something you prefer not to talk about?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm very happy to, because it is an important part of that why question that Graham asked. I mean, really, I talk about two things that happened in the year 2007. So my daughter was born in the year 2007. That's not one of the two things. But in that same year, one of the things that happened was very personal. And one was very public, and everyone would have heard about it. The personal thing was that my father was arrested for having indecent images of children on his computer, abusive child pornography. And for us as a family, that came as a complete shock. We had no idea that even porn use was something that my father was struggling with. Particularly, it came out of the blue for us. He was Christian, involved in church life, was a CEO of a kind of youth charity where he lived. He was, perhaps not, if you were to meet him, someone you would think would be struggling with that or involved in that. And what we found out over the kind of following year was that he had hidden what I would call a porn addiction for decades. And towards the end of those decades, that had escalated and that had spiraled into him crossing the line from legal mainstream content to illegal abusive content. And I think for me, one of the things that felt significant about that for us as a family, particularly a few years later when I was probably in a place where I was beginning to reflect a little more. Obviously initially you just have shock and pain and all those other emotions that you have to think about. But I began to think about the fact that I did know who my dad was. I knew who he was, what values he had, what beliefs he had, and I began to just try and understand, really, as I said, that his porn use wasn't just a discipleship problem or a habit that he wasn't kind of dealing with or talking about, that there was something else happening here. And as I say, back over a decade ago, I don't think we had the research perhaps we have now in society around things like substance addiction, for example. I think we now understand you can get addicted to gambling, for example, or you can get addicted to your phone, or we've kind of got a bit of a better understanding around addiction. But I think for me, that was the first time I began to read and research and perhaps understand something of my dad's journey, that this wasn't just about when he was using pornography, it wasn't just about choice. There was something more going on there, that addiction, I think, was playing its part. And so that began for me then. I think a road of thinking around, well, what sort of support, what sort of help did my dad need? And if he had taken that help much earlier on, if he had found that help when he was looking at kind of mainstream websites and things like that, what would that have prevented for his life, and also obviously in terms of what would that prevented in terms of the victims of abuse who were involved in the material that he was found with. There was a question there of what could have stopped this from happening, and so that's why our work is focused on people who struggle with mainstream pornography. We don't work with offenders. We don't work with people who may have crossed that line themselves. There are some amazing organizations out there that do that work. But our work as Naked Truth is focused on those individuals, Christians or non-Christians, faith or no faith, who have reached a place where they're recognizing that porn use has become a life-controlling issue. It's become something they can't just sort of through willpower or even accountability just stop, that it seems to become more than that, and actually offering them some of the kind of professional support in the same way that you probably wouldn't just say to an alcoholic, you just need to try a bit harder. That there is perhaps a need for prayer, but also professional support. That's where we kind of began to ask questions about what would it look like for someone to get help when they need it, and so that was one of the things that I think caused me to think about Naked Truth, was simply asking that question: what would my dad needed? And because it's such an issue that has so much shame attached to it, and so much often things are hidden and a secret, and so I think we began to explore options, which we can talk about later, of how could somebody access help that might not mean they just go to their local church leader or their local a group that's running somewhere. Is there ways in which people could get help? So back in 2014, we started online groups on this strange platform that no one had ever heard of called Zoom, because we recognized actually the technology that had given anonymity and accessibility to what was harmful, that same technology can provide anonymity and support to people who perhaps didn't feel able to go and talk to somebody quite yet. And so, that was how Naked Truth began, really. It was just going, okay, let's just explore this. Could we do something? Could we offer support and help online so that people could access it, perhaps in their car at lunchtime when nobody knows, but begin to get some of that support and help. But in that same year, sorry, go on.
No, you go with your second point, because I couldn't quite work out whether 2 points were encapsulated in what you just said. So keep going with your...
Yeah, well, no, just the second thing that just happened in that same year was that Steve Jobs stood on a stage in California and held this piece of plastic in his hand saying, "Today, Apple will reinvent the phone." And it was the same year as smartphones being launched. So although I think, we recognize that porn's been around forever, really, what happened really in that year was seismic. It was a game changer because it really was the beginning of a new generation with anytime, anywhere access to unregulated content. And as I say, my daughter was born that year. That's all she's known. So her whole lifetime, smartphones have been part of her life. She is what psychologists and sociologists call a digital native. That is all she has known. And that shift from, the sex shop to the smartphone, for example, is significant in I think that how big this has become as an issue. And so I think probably even back then, people would sort of be saying, well, isn't this just something that some people struggle with sometimes? And so, yes, that happened to be your dad, but is it really that big a thing? Whereas I think now what we understand is this is huge. So in 2020, for example, 49% of UK adults told Ofcom that they'd seen porn that month. So, what we're seeing here is that a porn user isn't just kind of like a man in a dirty Mac coming out of a sex shop. It's anyone who owns a product made by Mac or Samsung. That shift was really significant. And so that's another reason, that's another part of the why. There is that personal story, but actually the other why is that this is an old enemy, but with new weapons, if you like. This is something that even in our, the lifetime of our children has changed kind of almost immeasurably. We can't really quite comprehend it. And so you say the word pornography, and that will mean different things to different people and different generations. To some people, they just think, oh, a few magazines or VHSs, and they're like, oh, is it really? Why? What? Does it really need a charity? Whereas for other people, it means this digital world that is actually huge. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, Ian, I was just wondering, so I guess as Christians, we have, we've got the Bible, which tells us exactly how we can healthily kind of conduct relationships, including sexual relationships. But how do you, when you're kind of, when you're faced with people who perhaps aren't believers, how do you lay out the damages that pornography does? So if you're speaking to parliamentarians, what is your kind of, I don't know, your mission statement? Why is porn so bad for society, for families, for people?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we would do, for example, in schools. So I think we've seen something like 100,000 school pupils in the last decade. And obviously the majority, 99.9% of them would be sort of non-faith based schools. We do a few things in a few kind of faith schools, but mostly we are doing exactly what you're saying, is we're having to put forward the reasons why porn might be harmful to young people who think this is just normal and a bit of harmless fun. Why wouldn't they? Great. I mean, I can get onto a porn site for free and I don't have to prove my age to anyone. What's the bad news? That's where they are. And so having to start from that point and help them think that through is a key part of our work. So really there's kind of three areas that we would focus on in school, for example, and that would be this would be a similar conversation, but in a different way if we were talking to parents or parliamentarians. And the three areas really that we focus on is how porn is harmful to our physical health. So we would point to the peer-reviewed research now that there is increasing amount of that will talk about how porn, online porn, digital porn is a super stimuli. in terms of the way that the brain works, and so therefore the way the brain responds to porn is that there is an overload of those kind of natural chemicals like dopamine and other neurochemicals that the reward system gives us. So people do get a high, but also they're what comes with that is escalation and tolerance, so that what used to turn you on 6 months ago doesn't in the same way anymore. So you need to do more of it, or a more extreme version of it, just to get the same feeling that you had. And so that what we're seeing through that scientific research is that porn use can and does lead to addiction and dependency. So that's one of the things we'd talk about. We'd also maybe talk about what is becoming an increasingly recognized phenomenon within the NHS of porn-induced erectile dysfunction, for example. I don't know if you were expecting to talk about ED in your podcast, but that is now something that GPs are diagnosing. They're noticing men in their 20s, mid-20s, coming to see them around this problem, and doctors are linking the fact that those individuals are only able to have an erection when they are watching porn. But in real relationships, in real life, that isn't happening. And they're also acknowledging that perhaps those young men have been using porn for 10 years. They started when they were teenagers, when they were 15, and 10 years on, this is what's happening. So these are physical things that are happening with the body that we would talk about. That's not a moral or value-based thing. That's just this is physically what we're learning and understanding. And in the same way that back in the 1930s, people would, doctors would prescribe and recommend cigarettes because there just wasn't the scientific research. They just thought it was a bit of harmless fun. We are realizing now that the research, the medical research, is helping us understand that there might be a public health issue here around porn use, and that's one of the conversations we're having with parliamentarians. Certainly, is can we get porn to a place where, in the same way gambling is now, it is actually, it's called a public health crisis, and there are other countries where that they're probably a little further ahead on that kind of declaration and understanding. So there's that piece. The second thing that we would talk about is the impact that porn has on our relationships, the way we see ourselves, our self-esteem, our body image, some of those things, mental health around that. And there's kind of various statistics around mental health and porn use, but also just the way we see other people and the way that we treat other people. So again, there's been government reports linking violence against women and girls and porn use, and that there is this link between those things. And it's not surprising, really, when you find out that 88% of porn videos contain physical violence or aggression, and 97% of those the targets are women. And then you have people like the NSPCC talking to young boys, and 44% of those young boys say that porn influences their ideas about what sex should be. And it's not difficult to imagine that if this is the majority of the content, because one of the things that's changed is not just how accessible porn has become, but what the actual content is. It has become abusive and violent. If a teenage boy puts porn into Google, what they don't get is, topless pictures of Sam Fox, like I would have if I was looking for that when I was a teenager. It is violent, abusive, aggressive content, what we would probably call hardcore content. It's the first search results. And so the links that we're now beginning to see between how that affects the way that young men and boys feel they're supposed to treat women and in relationships, the way that young girls feel they're supposed to respond in relationships, is all being normalized and shaped by porn. So that would be a second thing that is a huge concern to lots of people in society, whatever their values are. And then the third one really is the industry itself, and just what we're understanding now around the exploitation and the coercion, in some cases, examples of trafficking and exploitation that exists within what is actually an unregulated and a very dark industry. And so they're kind of three areas where we want young people, for example, to ask, well, is this good for me? Is this good for my health? We want them to be thinking about what's in it, what are the messages, what are the ideas that I'm being taught, and how did it get made? What's the actual story here behind this screen? Who is that person? And so they all speak of the harms, and there's more we could say. And if you start to bring in faith as well and things like that, but in that kind of non-faith context, there's still a very strong arguments that I think people go, yeah, that makes sense. That's important. We need to be talking and thinking about that.
Just a couple of other clarifying questions. One's more of a cultural one. Is it true that there's a sort of, I don't know what you call it, a double standard or a confusion in culture generally, in that they can see some of those harms you're talking about, and society would generally frown on abuse of children and abusive videos, and they would talk about addiction as being a problem. But I guess there is a difference between faith groups and Christians in particular and general culture, in that pornography in its broadest sense is not considered bad. Is that difficult to navigate sometimes? Because you can talk about the harms in sort of narrowly defined ways that perhaps most of culture agrees with, but most of culture doesn't agree that it's bad in general. Is that true?
Yeah, again, I think it depends, doesn't it? Who you're talking about in culture, and certainly there would be people who wouldn't have faith but would have a problem with the objectification of other human beings, for example. And you might have someone who would say, well, I have no faith, but I am a feminist, and therefore my issue with this is around the way that women are being objectified or sexualized or whatever. And so you might have a conversation with someone who that's their reason for saying, actually, I don't think this is fine. And I think what's shifting is I think people who say, oh no, it's fine, what's the problem, tend to be operating from a lack of understanding of what pornography has kind of morphed into. So they're still kind of using a slightly kind of old lens in terms of they are thinking of porn as just almost being a bit like, oh, it is those magazines, and it is so it's just what I used to see but is now online, and they're not necessarily thinking about, oh, okay, I think when people have a deeper understanding of the violence or the exploitation or the nature of content, it is a lot harder to find people going, oh no, okay, this is all right. Now then, politically, or people might say, well, we still believe in freedom of speech. We still believe that porn sites should be allowed to exist, and people should be able to kind of put up what they want and stuff like that. But I think particularly the lack of regulation around consent, the lack of perhaps ethical kind of practices in terms of how porn is created, the majority of people are concerned about now, because of what porn's come. So they would argue for a more ethical porn. That would be their argument.
Can I jump in there? Because I suppose through some of the work that I've been doing, I've noticed there has been increased awareness about the extreme violence and the kind of immoral practices that have been involved with pornography. But there's something that does unnerve me, in that in many sort of sex and relationships education lessons, children are now being asked to consider the morality of not necessarily porn full stop, but how porn can be produced ethically. And I've seen a number of lesson plans, and even videos that have been offered to children through curriculum, where they are given better alternatives to access porn that has been made ethically, that has been made with full consent, that represents a range of body types. Now, obviously, I have a moral problem with that, because of the way that those people are being objectified anyway, whether they're being paid substantially or not, and B, the way that sex and promiscuity is portrayed in this way that is given this sort of, as long as you're doing it ethically, it doesn't matter in what context or whom you're doing it with. And then there's just that that problem, being exposed to explicit material, which in itself is wrong. We know what the Bible says, but also then can still lead to more extreme forms. But yeah, what do you have? What's your perspective on that kind of the ethical porn industry?
I mean, my perspective as a Christian, like for me as an individual, I would be saying, well, that's an oxymoron still in my mind. Ethical pornography that is, that I don't see how pornography can be ethical because of what it is in nature. But I do understand the importance of journeying with people and kind of meeting people where they are when you're kind of talking about some of this stuff. So I would, if we're talking about something within a kind of parliamentary context, I would be saying regulation is a good thing. We want better regulation around this. And so I could campaign for, porn to be, all forms of porn to be illegal. And, that could be my aim. I could say, let's just make it all illegal. But I recognize that's probably not realistic. And so actually it makes sense for me to be saying, actually, we want to find where there is common ground and common belief, and so to work with organizations who, for example, might be wanting to see ethical pornography as their end goal. Then there's so much work to be done. Let's join forces in getting to that first step, if that makes sense. Because something that is, quotes, ethical is certainly better than something that is unregulated. So I think I would want to work towards what is better, but it might not be my ultimate belief that is what's best, if that makes sense. And I think one of the problems we can sometimes have as the church is how we posture ourselves in some of these conversations, is that sometimes we posture ourselves with a little bit of a kind of a moral kind of this is wrong, which we may believe, but I think sometimes that is then difficult for people to work with us to actually find a common change that we would equally want to achieve. And so I don't know if it's always helpful for people to say we would say as an organization we're anti-pornography. We're going to not. We could have just say we're anti-addiction, but we don't. We say we're anti-pornography, but we recognize the fact that if we want to try and there is the potential to see change through collaboration, and part of that collaboration, I think, is working with people who might not have the same end goal.
Yeah, in increments.
Yeah.
Yes.
Similar in some of the abortion discussions and pragmatism. We hate abortion, but if we can move the limit to be later.
Yes.
Earlier, sorry, for abortions being illegal, then we'd say that's a good thing. That's a win, even though it's not pure. Can I ask you a really backward question? Then we need to go forward to what should pastors and parents kind of know and what should they do? But I just want a really basic question, which because you were in such good full flow, I didn't ask. Give us a definition.
Of course.
Pornography. As compared to films that people might watch that might show people having sex.
Yeah, no, that's a really important. So again, in school, we define, we have two definitions of pornography. The first is a dictionary one, which would be pictures, images, and films that are designed to stimulate sexual excitement. So actually, and that's like a Collins English Dictionary definition. That actually would include your Netflix series where there's some sex scenes in. But what I would say in a school setting, for example, what our team would say in a school setting is, imagine walking around a museum with your grandma, and you walk into a room and there's a load of naked statues from the Greek era. Are you looking at porn with your grandma? And so we are clear to say, you know, the purpose, the function is important in the definition. So probably the museum curator wasn't thinking about trying to stimulate sexual excitement to make money. They were probably thinking about art and history. Whereas you could actually watch a pop video on YouTube that has no nudity or sex in, but could be pornographic because of how it's filmed, and how it's filmed is aiming to stimulate sexual excitement to get more clicks and views. So it's not as simple as saying, is it about nudity or is it about, seeing sex? Because that definition for me broadens that understanding. And also allows art, and allows for, the fact that a life drawing class is probably not, I think a Christian could sit in a life drawing class and not feel like, oh my goodness, am I creating pornography as I draw this person doing my art degree? I would say, no, you're not. So that's how I would define pornography. But then the second definition we use. Yeah, the second definition we use is that pornography is the junk food of healthy sex and relationships. And so what we talk about in school is that there is something better and there is something beautiful about sex and about commitment and love and relationships with others. And the problem is that what porn is often is that kind of quick fix, easily accessible, damaging to our health version of what is actually a good thing, and I think it's again important for us to posture ourselves as saying sex is a good thing. It's just that porn is a kind of counterfeit, hollow, reduced version, an unhealthy version of something that is good and is beautiful, and we would say, given and created by God. And so that's another part of the definition for me. We talk about how Jamie Oliver is somebody as a chef who is passionate about food, but has been campaigning against junk food for decades now. And it is possible to be both. It's possible to be passionate about sex and relationships and campaign against what is unhealthy in like something like porn. And I think, again, that's part of I think our challenge as the church is how we talk about sex and relationships in a way that is actually positive and healthy, and actually acknowledges, what is good, as well as acknowledging what is damaging. And I think maybe historically, in our desire to kind of acknowledge what is damaging about sex, we either don't talk about it at all, because or we can come across slightly like, well, we're kind of anti anything that's to do with that stuff. But hopefully, we understand that in the context of love and commitment and relationships, this is a beautiful and a good thing. And particularly for teenagers, for example, which is, as I say, where we would talk about this, something people are very curious about. So not talking about it doesn't help, because then they get their sex ed from porn, which is the worst place to get it from. And so I think Lizzie would understand that. We've got to be talking about it, but talking about it well, rather than just ignoring it or hoping that it's going to go away, because it's not, particularly if you're a teenager. So how do we do that?
Yeah. Did you have a point, Lizzie, just now?
I've got lots of points, but I want you to have the opportunity to ask questions, Graham.
No, the thing is, Ian, this is so interesting. We could do another couple of hours on this, because you're both passionate and well informed about it. So we're benefiting from all that. So it becomes a bit unstructured in my mind, because I'm thinking about 100 questions at the same time.
Yeah,
sure.
Just trying to sort of narrow it down to thinking about people who might listen to this. There could be parents, there could be pastors, so on. What should they know and what should they do? It's not a simple answer, but just to get us started. I mean, Yeah. In our church, for example, we have talked about it, and we do make references sometimes in sermons about it. And we've done separate seminars on it. Actually, we've done some of our own, but actually we've got one of your speakers coming to speak on a Sunday evening in February, I think.
Yeah.
So we are talking about it. But what should we know? What should we be doing as Christians, particularly?
Yeah, that's let's maybe separate the two, because I think there is a kind of unique conversation perhaps around for parents, and I appreciate there'll be people who'll be thinking about this with two minds as they listen to this. They might be listening as a parent going, oh my goodness, this is my children and the world they're growing up in. Even if I'm not struggling with this, oh my goodness, what do I need to do to help them, protect them, talk to them? And then there may be people who have children or don't have children, who are either thinking about themselves or people that in their congregation or their small group or whatever, and they're like, what does it look like to talk about and help me or them? And so let's separate the two. I mean, I think the important thing to say at the beginning, I would say, is the first thing that we need to be intentional about is reducing shame and offering hope. And I think whether we're talking to our children or whether we're talking to the person in our small group who said, this is something I'm struggling with, or in our church, if we're a church leader, or indeed, if we're talking to ourselves, I think there is so much shame attached to this, particularly within the church context. It's something that we've kind of kept in the shadows. It's something that we've not talked about, and because of that is just perfect conditions for shame to grow. And that shame is evident in all sorts of ways. It hugely affects the way we see ourselves. It hugely affects what we think God might think of us. It hugely affects actually what we think we are qualified to do within the church. You know, lots of church leaders so frustrated that people aren't stepping up and doing more. And, you know, what we find with the hundreds of Christians that we speak to every year, those who are going through our programs and our groups, so many of them who are Christians will say, in the church context, I felt I couldn't get involved with this. I couldn't help with that. I couldn't do this because I was questioning whether I'm even a real Christian because I struggle with this issue. And so trying to reduce shame sounds obvious, but you know, as you talk about something, that is often the immediate response. So yes, we need to talk about it. Yes, we need to be kind of bringing it into conversations, into sermons, creating spaces for conversations to happen. But we have to not just talk. We have to talk with the right tone. We've got to talk with a tone that reduces shame and offers hope to people. And one example of this might be, for example, 44 in a recent Barna report which came out last year. So very recent statistics are kind of Christians and churches around this issue. 75% of Christian men and 40% of Christian women admitted to watching porn occasionally. 22% of practicing Christians said they watch porn weekly, and 7% daily. So we're talking quite a lot of people in your congregation potentially. You know, this is a real life issue right now. It's not just something they struggled with in the past. This is something that they've dealt with this week or this month, or maybe even today. And so how we talk about that is really important. Interestingly as well, from that same report, 44% of women reported watching porn. So kind of closing that kind of historical gender gap that we think exists actually. And I remember, for example, in one of our team who had struggled with porn in her her kind of young adult life, and was a Christian and was in church, who said the only time our church talked about porn, there was one time, and there was a Sunday service, and the person who was talking about it got up and said, guys, today we're going to talk about porn. I know that's going to be tricky. I know it's going to be difficult. And so ladies, you can just switch off right now. So, because for the next 20 minutes, we're talking about porn. And what that did, what seemed like just a little humorous kind of just trying to ease into what is a difficult topic, actually really caused a huge amount of shame for her, because she's like, well, I already thought I was already questioning, is there something wrong with me? Am I the only one? Am I, I'm a Christian woman looking at porn. Is there something seriously wrong with me? Am I a real woman? Am I a real Christian? And it just reinforced that. So I use that in that story just to highlight how important it is. People talk about being trauma informed in the way that we act and respond, and that's actually really important in this area too. But being shame informed, I'll make sure that we are thinking about that as we talk about it,
Ian,
and then in the same breath talk about it with hope
just,
as well. Go on, Lizzie.
Yeah, I want to sort of not push back, but I just want to ask a question. How do we then, as Christians, because I think it's a really good point, the more that we kind of hide things and keep them underground, I suppose the greater the potential is for them to fester and for the problem to get worse, because no one wants to seek help. But how, as Christians, do we keep that tension between not inducing monumental amounts of shame, but also saying that there is something that should induce a certain level of regret and shame about some kind of behavior. And that's not to kind of demonize people who struggle with this in the same way that you shouldn't demonize people who have a gambling addiction or an alcoholic or occasionally, drink. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. Is there not some kind of innate instinctive thing that God has placed in us that there is something shameful about this, but yet how can we, I don't know whether I'm just saying, how do we keep that tension that is right?
No, I think it's a really good question. I was thinking about what Ian was saying about how we speak about it, and I know I've done better and done worse in that sometimes you can highlight it in a way that suggests it's the worst thing you could possibly be doing. And it's in some special category all of its own. But I think just in the same way you would want to encourage people not to envy, not to be greedy, not to lie, you want to prompt and prod people's consciences if they are watching pornography to say this is morally wrong, this is wrong before God, and this is something you will need to repent of. But at the same time, like we would do with every sin, encouraging people to say there is forgiveness and there is freedom, and there isn't shame in the sense of desperate shame. I'm not quite the right word. There's a difference between repentance and shame. I don't think shame is biblical, but I think recognizing wrong is biblical. Shame is a kind of an unsatisfiable desperation.
Yeah, sure. I see.
Which will not repent, actually, because it's even too shame to repent. Sorry, Ian, I'm taking over the answer, but I'm reflecting on it out loud, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things that occurred to me as you asked that question, Lizzie. One is context. So as I think about Jesus and how he corrected and challenged people, what I think is really interesting is in kind of public settings, it feels like he focuses particularly on for the people who are broken or powerless or hurting. He focuses on the good news. He focuses on restoration, and it doesn't have to be like this. There's something better. There's hope for you, and I think that would be one of the things I would say, that when we're in that kind of wider context where we're talking about this issue, let's raise it. Let's take it out of the shadows. Let's talk about it as, we know this is something that some people in the congregation today, you'll be struggling with this, and we want you to know that actually we believe that this isn't who you are. This isn't your identity. This isn't the sum of you. This isn't your future. That God actually has something for your life that that doesn't have to include this, and that you can, yes, be forgiven, but also you can be restored and you can be healed. And it's a language that acknowledges that it's a reality, but its focuses on what is hopeful. I think then when you are one-to-one with people, that's where there is context to maybe be a little bit more like, hang on a minute, that's not okay, is it? You said you were gonna do something that you didn't do, and that's why you've fallen down again, because you actually didn't put into place the things that you knew you needed to. And that can be a bit more direct, but I think because the context is small group or one-to-one, I think no one knows what Jesus said to Zacchaeus, right, when they were having dinner together, but what he did in public was acknowledge him and accept him. What happened in a private conversation somehow led to repentance that you were saying, Graham, and we don't know what happened in those private conversations. But I think that's helpful for me, is that when I think about talking about it in a public space, I want the main feeling to be one of acceptance and hope, and good news and change. And then when we're working with individuals, pastorally or in friendship, I think that's when you can be a bit more direct and corrective, but because there's trust and there's relationship and love, it
That's
reduces
really
the
helpful.
shame.
Yeah. So is there more you want to say in terms of because we're nearly out of time, because we've
Sure.
is there more you'd want to say to make sure sort of church leaders and youth leaders and so on would be aware to do? I think we've said quite a lot about awareness of the topic itself, but you said in general, bringing it out into the open. You got any kind of specifics?
Yeah, I mean, we have a load of resources for churches, and within that, that's deliberately stuff we've created to help train people. So whether you're a small group leader, whether you're a church leader, whether you're a youth leader, and so I'd probably at this point, particularly with limited time, I'd kind of signpost that it's free. It's if you just go onto the App Store, you can download and just look for NT churches, and you'd be able to find that, or just visit our website, nakedtruthproject.com, and just look for the tab that sort of says partner churches, and you'll find there's a lot of free resources there, because I think it's helpful to know what can I signpost people to. And we, as I said, we run groups, we have kind of professional and kind of expert support for people, and one of the things you can do often is just signpost. That's sometimes the thing. You can say, okay, I'm not necessarily the expert that you need. I want to journey with you. I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to pray with you on this journey, but you actually need to go and get some support here. And so to know what that support is, we provide that. It's, as I say, it's online, so anyone can access it, and it's available. There's materials that are watch on demand, and then there's live groups as well that people can join. And so I think one of the things, if you're a church leader, for example, is just find out what it is we do. We offer support for users, for partners of users. We offer support for parents as well. So just get to know a little bit about the issue, but also get to know a little bit about what we do, because then that will be easier for you to know, oh my goodness, okay, I don't have to figure this out on my own. There are some people who this is their area. We can signpost. But as I say, there's also some training around, okay, this is how you can practically and pastorally walk with someone, so that, they might be getting that professional help from our team, but actually, how you have a conversation with somebody in that first moment of disclosure is vital. What you say and don't say is vital. They might have a negative experience and then never look for help because it was just everything they were fearful it would be, and so part of that training is, how do you have those first conversations well, or how do you make sure that you bring that hope and help that we talked about. So I would really recommend people just get hold of some of those resources, because I think lots of reasons why churches and church leaders in particular don't talk about porn is because they don't feel equipped to deal with what might happen if they talk about porn. You know, they're worried it's going to be this kind of can of worms that will get opened up, and so that's why we've created these resources. As I say, they're free, they're available, that you can work through in your own time. Anyone in your church or team, if they run a small group or something, they can get that same training as well. And it's just some videos and it's some resources that hopefully mean that you feel a little bit more equipped and able to talk about this openly, because you know what you would say in that moment if it happened. We also, as I say, run stuff for parents. We run a regular parent workshops online that just give real practical tips for parents on how do you talk about this issue, as well as how can you put some things in place, some some practical things, some software things you can do. So we try and cover both, the kind of practical and the conversational, and that's for parents of younger children as well as parents of teenagers. And so again, if you go to the website or if you download the app, you'll see dates for when those are happening, and they're free again as well. So hopefully people can just access some support when they need it.
It sounds really good, and I've looked at some of the resources; they're really helpful. I think as well as pastors and as church leaders and as Christians in general, we do have lots of resource that, as long as we understand the issue, where there are things we are familiar with in terms of the grace of God, forgiveness, new life, repentance, the Holy Spirit working in our lives, Christians encouraging us, our life of prayer, daily disciplines of Bible reading and prayer, all those things, they all connect with this. It's not like this is in
Absolutely.
some super category of sin.
Yeah.
That those things can't impact, like it's got some sort of shield around it. that prayer doesn't work for that. It works for other things, but it doesn't work for that. So we don't want to be simplistic and say there aren't physiological and habit reasons why this is particularly hard and challenging, and we also don't want to say that there's not, in God's common grace, lots of good knowledge out there, but it is in the end part of the general category of sin that we can repent of and find forgiveness of and freedom for, which we should be familiar with as Christians.
Absolutely. And I think that two quick thoughts on that. One would be, I think as humans, my belief is that we're like hybrids, not the car version, yes. Which is electric and petrol, but we are, we're spirit and we are flesh. And, the angels are all spirit, aren't they? Animals maybe are all flesh, but we are this hybrid of the two. And I think that's just important to remember, that God created us physical beings, but then he breathed his life and his spirit, his ruach, into us. And so actually there is this kind of hybrid response that I think is helpful for us to remember, that there's a physical, practical thing that is going on in the brain of somebody who is using porn, and there might be a physical, psychological response, but there is a spiritual thing that is happening in a person as well, that is connected to sin, and so that there is a spiritual response that comes with that. And I guess the famous Ezekiel 37 passage is a helpful kind of biblical reminder of that too, where you see the dry bones that say we have no hope, there's no life in us, and one of the things that God does is he gives Ezekiel proximity to those bones, so he has to get dirty, actually ritually unclean, in fact, and so I think part of our conversation might have felt a bit unclean for people to listen to, but I think it is important. It's what God sometimes asks us to do, is get close, understand it. But then when it comes to him prophesying to the bones, it's interesting, isn't it, that there's these two things. There's the initial prophecy to the bones that causes a physical thing to happen over a process, actually, bone and then tendon and then flesh. And I think there is a process that people can take part in when it comes to this issue, and some of that is physical. But even when that had happened, he still had to prophesy to the breath, to the spirit, to enter into those bodies, because they aren't just physical beings. There is a spiritual part to them too. And so I think for us, as we think about what does it mean for us to write a better story, to prophesy to our congregations and our communities, I think it's both. It's believing that God does heal through process and practical and physical things, therapy and support and community and those things. But also he looks to us to believe in spiritual transformation and for his spirit and breath to bring change as well. And I think we see that as a biblical model of the two hand in hand. So exactly what you're saying, Graham, is that it's like we're created to be both. And therefore our response as church needs to be both. If we just do one, if we just pray, sometimes there's lots of people we've spoken to who said, I've had lots of prayer and I've still not seen change. And actually they probably needed some practical support. For others, it's like if you just have practical support and you don't bring God's spirit and life into this situation, then you're going to fall empty, then fall short too. We need to look at both things. And that's probably a helpful way to close, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it is. I was going to say that. Thank you so much, Ian. You've given the website, and some people want to look at those resources. And
yeah, they are really good. I've just been looking, really into things. Yeah.
Good, very good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Right,
Ian.
thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Affinity Talks Gospel Podcast. Affinity is a network of evangelical churches and Christian organizations working together, sharing stories in order to encourage and equip God's people to preach and live the gospel in this generation. If you're interested in supporting this ministry, we'd love you to join us. Just head over to affinity.org.uk/join to find out more. And we look forward to catching up with you on the next episode of Affinity Talks Gospel.